A group of casino workers were to travel to construct the casino and hotel. They boarded the jet chartered for them, unaware of what would happen. The story of an East Coast jet designed for private passengers is based on official accident reports and eyewitness accounts. On July 31, 2008, at Atlantic City International Airport in New Jersey, East Coast Jet's Flight 81 was getting ready for a particular domestic passenger flight. Revel Entertainment had chartered this flight to transport their employees from Atlantic City to Owatonna, Minnesota. The aircraft chosen for this journey was a 1991 Hawker 800 registered November 8, 18 Mike Victor. Over 16 years of service, the aircraft had accrued 6,570 total airframe hours and completed 5,164 takeoff and landing cycles. In command was Captain Clark John Kiefer, a 40-year-old former flight instructor who had been part of the East Coast Jets team since 2005. Captain Kiefer had accumulated 3,600 flight hours, including 1,118 hours specifically on the Hawker 800. Additionally, he had 874 hours of experience on Learjet aircraft, summing up to 2,062 flight hours on the turbine engine plane. The first officer, Daniel D'Ambrosio, aged 27, had a slightly different career trajectory. He had joined the East Coast Jets less than a year ago. His aviation career started when he was hired by Colgan Air in early 2005, where he completed the company's training program. However, he left Colgan Air after the company unexpectedly transferred him from Allentown to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Following his departure from Colgan Air, the first officer worked for a local Allentown corporation, flying Cessna airplanes along the East Coast. First Officer D'Ambrosio had accumulated 1,454 flight hours, with 295 of those hours spent operating the Hawker 800. He also had 2 hours of experience on Learjet aircraft, totaling 297 hours on a turbine engine plane. At 8:05 local time, there were 6 passengers on board East Coast Jet's Flight 81, all of whom were connected to the construction of the massive Revel Casino in Atlantic City. They were flying to Minnesota for a meeting with the glass manufacturer for the project. Let's take a quick break. We've put a lot of effort into this video, so if you find it informative, please remember to subscribe and like. Your support allows us to create more content for you. Just after 8 a.m., Flight 81 commenced its takeoff roll with the captain as the pilot flying and the first officer as the pilot monitoring. The aircraft took off from Atlantic City International Airport at 8:13 a.m. Around 9:22 local time, more than 2 hours into the flight, the Minneapolis Air Route Traffic Control Center instructed the flight to descend to flight level 240. 2 minutes later, the crew received information from the Automated Weather Observation System for Owatonna-Degner Airport. This information revealed calm winds and 10-mile visibility despite thunderstorms and rain, with remarks indicating lightning detected in the distance in all directions. At 9:25, the controller asked the first officer if they could see intense precipitation directly ahead, to which the first officer replied affirmatively. The controller advised against flying through it, saying that "I don't recommend you go through it. I've had nobody go through it." In response, the first officer expressed a desire to deviate to the right, and the controller approved the deviation. Around 9:28, the controller cleared the flight to descend to flight level 190. Shortly afterward, the flight received clearance to descend further to 14,000 feet. At roughly the same time, the Minneapolis Air Route Traffic Control Center controller transferred communication to Minneapolis Approach Control. The first officer then contacted Minneapolis Approach Control and requested a turn toward the airport. At 9:34, the Minneapolis Approach Controller directed the captain to turn the aircraft left to a heading of 250 degrees, and the captain acknowledged this instruction. Shortly after, control of the flight was transferred to Rochester Approach Control. When Rochester Approach Control asked the captain which approach he wanted to use at Owatonna Airport, he said, "We could do the ILS." Subsequently, the Rochester Approach Controller cleared the flight to descend to 7,000 feet and began guiding the ILS approach. Around 9:35, the flight crew started going through their approach checklist. Just 43 seconds later, while the pilots were still completing the checklist, the controller contacted the flight. The controller instructed the flight to descend to 3,000 feet at the pilot's discretion and make a right turn to a heading of 190 degrees. At 9:37, the controller gave the first officer the current weather information for Owatonna Airport.
East Coast Jet 81, I just picked up the weather for you at Owatonna. It's about 20 minutes old now. They're showing the wind 320 at 8, visibility 10 or greater, thunderstorms 3,700 scattered, ceiling 4,500 broken, 5,000 overcast. Temperature 18, dew point 16. Altimeter 2988. And they're showing lightning in the distance, all quadrants.
All right, thank you very much. East Coast Jet 81.
East Coast Jet 81, I am showing light precip for you. Pretty much your whole route into Owatonna, and then there's just a couple of heavy cells about 5 miles north and northeast of Owatonna.
Roger, East Coast 81.
The first officer then said to the captain, "We should aim to reach the airport as soon as possible."
Coast Jet 81, turn right hand 200.
200, East Coast 81.
The aircraft was descending through 3,000 feet. At this point,
Turn right hand 250.
the flight crew then proceeded to extend the flaps to position 1. Within moments, the controller cleared the flight for the ILS approach.
Coast Jet 81 is 7 miles from Tana, turn right heading 290, maintain 3,000 till established on the localizer, cleared ILS, runway 30 approach.
290, 3,000 established, curve ILS 30.
At 9:42, the captain informed that they had the runway in sight and requested the cancellation of the flight's IFR flight plan.
Exit at approaching the East Coast Jet 81, report canceling IFR this frequency in the air, all with Princeton flight service on the ground, change to advisory is approved.
East Coast Jet 81, we will report canceling with your
East Coast Jet 81, roger, IFR cancellation is received, swap VFR frequency change approved.
The captain proceeded to have a conversation with the Rochester approach controller regarding the air traffic around the airport.
East Coast Jet 81, no traffic reported or observed in the vicinity.
The flight crew extended the landing gear. At 9:44, an electronic voice recorded on the cockpit voice recorder stated, 2 minimums. Following this, the first officer mentioned, air valves are shut, damper to go, and then simply, damper. Finally, at 9:45, the aircraft touched down on the runway. At that moment, the speed brake handle was moved to the dump position. 10 seconds later, the cockpit voice recorder captured a noise resembling the speed brakes being moved to the shut position. Simultaneously, passengers began to notice that something was amiss with the flight. Recognizing that there wasn't enough runway left to stop safely, the pilots made the decision to initiate a go-around. They retracted the flaps and spoilers and applied maximum takeoff thrust.
Flaps. There we go. Not flying! No! You're flying!
As the aircraft commenced its takeoff attempt, it exceeded the end of the runway at 9:45. Subsequently, the plane collided with the localizer antenna support structure, approximately 1,000 feet from the runway's end. This collision resulted in the aircraft banking sharply to the right. The plane continued to bank to the right until it was completely inverted, or upside down. East Coast Jet's Flight 81 crashed into a cornfield beyond a dirt access road bordering the airport, approximately 2,400 feet from the runway. The National Transportation Safety Board determined that the accident was primarily caused by the captain's decision to initiate a go-around too late during the landing roll when there was insufficient runway remaining. Although the possibility of hydroplaning due to the wet runway was initially discussed, it was later ruled out. The crucial mistake made by the pilots was their failure to apply full brakes and their incorrect movement of the air brake handle toward the open position instead of selecting the proper dump position during the landing. Correctly handling this could have allowed the aircraft to come to a safe stop even after it had overrun the runway. The decision by the pilots to attempt to go around after surpassing the runway was heavily criticized. The NTSB identified the pilot's error in initiating the go-around as the primary cause of the accident, concluding that the aircraft could have come to a stop within the runway's safety margins if they hadn't attempted to go around. Contributing to the accident were the pilot's inadequate crew coordination, lack of cockpit discipline, and fatigue, all of which likely impaired the performance of both pilots. In memory of the 8 people who lost their lives in the crash,